With the release of Fallout 76, I see no better time to look back at Fallout 4 and the things it perhaps didn't do as well as it could. So here are a few of my gripes. It's hard to look at Fallout 4 and not take issue with the dialogue. I don't mean the fact that it's voiced over, or that the small phrase choices are a little vague compared to what you actually say, but rather with the variance that you can steer a conversation. It used to be in the older Fallout games that if you said the right things in the right order, you could create different outcomes, making dialogue itself an integral part of the game. Fallout 4 did away with that by making dialogue extremely straightforward, with any change in the dialogue's outcome simply being a clear-cut this or that decision. There are charisma speech challenges you can sometimes take, but they either don't actually affect the outcome of dialogue, or simply replace one of the this or that choices. Aside from that, Fallout 4 also does away with the skill checks, which were conversation choices that could only be selected should you have the appropriate amount of skill points in the required skill. Unlike choosing the correct sequence of dialogue choices or relying on chance, these skill checks were a way to give players an extra choice based on how they were building their character, which really made the skills you chose feel more important as their usefulness extended beyond the intended use. The reason that these disappeared isn't so much dialogue related as it's related to Fallout 4's shift to perk-only level upgrades. Skill points just no longer exist, though they're still referenced with the bobbleheads in an almost mockingly way. This butchering of the dialogue also affects a lot of the quests by making them just as simplified. You'll rarely, if ever, find quests with multiple ways to complete them. This is because most major quests tend to end with character dialogue, which immediately constricts the conclusion into the this or that conversation choices. And while we're on the topic of quests, another one of my gripes is the repetitive busywork quests that you're given by every faction in the game. These range from retrieving an item to planting an observation device to just clearing out a building. These quests are primarily just to extend the length of the game by making them required to unlock things within any given faction. And in my opinion, the secondary objective of these quests doesn't work out so well either. This secondary objective is to get you to explore locations you haven't already explored. While I understand that Bethesda wants you to experience all its locations, it just feels less special to be ordered to go somewhere and do something than it would be to stumble on a location naturally and wander inside to satisfy your own curiosity. And when the busywork quests aren't forced exploration, then they can only be the dreaded settlement quests. These are the quests where you're tasked to either build defenses or set up recruitment beacons using the creation system. Now, I don't particularly hate the creation system. I've spent plenty an hour turning the ugly ruins of Sanctuary into the ugly, poorly designed mess of Sanctuary I call home, but when you're sent to a new location and charged with building something and the location itself doesn't even have the proper materials, it's a real kick in the shins. There doesn't even need to be a quest involved, it's just annoying as is. And it's not like this needed to be a problem either. Fallout 4 has a feature called supply lines that share the resources between all your settlements, but it has two distinct requirements: getting the 6-point charisma perk and selecting a settler to act as the relay. The perk is easy enough, provided you've gone to the trouble of allocating your stats correctly, but the settler thing isn't, as it would require you to go back to another settlement and free up a settler just to link up the new location. It would have been so much easier to have these requirements removed and just have free access to stored resources the moment you unlock a new buildable location, but jumping through hoops is fun too, I guess. Fallout 4's gameplay has its own problems as well. While combat as a whole has improved since New Vegas and Fallout 3, there are some gripes I have with weapons and armor. The first of these lies with the legendaries. Legendaries are specialty items with unique special effects that are acquired from slaying legendary enemies, or as scripted rewards, or purchased from certain shopkeepers. My gripes come from the legendary enemy drops, as all of these items and their effects will be completely randomized. Now, these random drops are supposed to make you want to slay the harder legendary enemies so you can try and acquire items that really feel powerful and special. But this system has a lot of shortcomings, as many of the weapon combinations often feel useless, and the armors are especially likely to just give resistances against a certain enemy type, making their buffs circumstantial at best. Finding that one special combo of item and effect is nearly impossible unless you're lucky. This goes doubly so when you have the additional DLC, which adds even more combinations to the reward pool. Alongside that is the fact that the lower ranked weapons and armor still drop when at higher levels. I mean, what am I supposed to do with legendary lead pipes and leather armor when I'm decked out in heavy combat armor while using high-powered energy weapons? So, by the late game, I'm ignoring most legendaries as they come across as a waste of inventory space, not even worth the money you could sell them for. Not so special now, are they? My follow-up gripe is about Fallout 4's power armor and how obscenely overpowered it is. Now, power armor is different from regular armor as it acts as an exoskeleton with benefits that only it can provide. Even with the most basic set equipped, the defensive boost can have a massive effect on combat. Take this fight I had with some super mutants using a random armor set I just found. During this fight, there was a point where I focused on this minigun mutant right here, who is heavily over-leveling me as indicated by the skull near his health bar. While I'm shooting him, I'm getting attacked simultaneously by the big man himself, the mutant next to him, this one down by the car, and this one in the doorway. During this whole fight, I'm only shooting at the strong one, and by the time I kill him, I've barely lost half my health. To put that damage in perspective, just 10 minutes before that fight in power armor, I was getting my ass handed to me by some feral ghouls, where I needed to heal over and over again just to stay alive. Now, it's not as if power armor is some sort of super suit, it does come with limitations. To use them, you need to find these fusion cores to power the suit, and as you take damage while using it, the various armor parts will be destroyed and need repairs. However, I feel these limitations do not go far enough. Fusion cores are much too simple to find, I racked up 20 without even trying, and the repairs take very little resources. As you progress even further in the game, you'll go on to acquire even stronger power armor sets that can be upgraded to have even higher defenses and greater durability, and during that progression you'll get even more fusion cores and resources to the point that you'd never even need to remove the armor. Well, except to use certain computer terminals, but that gripe is beside the point. With the level of strength and protection these armors provide, I think to balance things out, Bethesda should have made it so that stronger armors drain fusion cores much faster, making it so you'd need to balance the defensive bonus with the fusion core duration, making the player either choose to be moderately buffed for a long amount of time, or be massively strengthened for a short period of time, making your choice of armor perhaps be situation-based where you adventure in a weaker set, and if you're going into a tough quest, equip the stronger set. This would certainly be better than it is now, and even make the weaker armors retain relevance throughout the whole game. I also have some gripes with Fallout 4's DLC. Excluding the texture pack, there are a total of 6 DLC packs. 3 are gameplay related, and 3 are creation related. Now, I already said I have no problem with the creation stuff, but as DLC, it doesn't really add much to do outside of new buildables. Which means, if you aren't into the creation stuff, this DLC is worthless. But the gameplay DLC not only comes with new things to do and places to explore, they also come with an array of new creations to play around with, making them much better for those who enjoy both sides. These gameplay DLCs are Automatron, Far Harbor, and Nuka World. The best in my opinion is Far Harbor, which adds a whole new location and even somewhat ties into the main quest of the main game, but the other 2 DLCs have their own specific problems. For starters, Automatron is a DLC that's more in the middle ground between creation and gameplay. The reason is that, unlike the other 2 gameplay DLC, this one doesn't add an entirely new area. It just adds a few new buildings and adds new mobs to the overworld, with the main gimmick of the DLC being the robot companion creation, which A, isn't useful if you like adventuring alone, and B, isn't helpful if you prefer using other non-robotic companions. So depending on your play preferences, this DLC could add very little. And the Nuka World DLC has less gameplay problems and more story problems. Now, the main game story, which I have yet to mention, has very little in the way of an evil outcome. Every faction is doing good in their own idealistic way, but no villains. So to compensate for that, Nuka World is all about being the leader of a bunch of maniacal raiders, with all the killing and enslaving of innocents that goes along with it. The story of this DLC doesn't really have any good outcomes. There's no faction working against the raiders that you can side with, and you can't make them all turn on each other at the end or anything like that. The most positive outcome you can choose is, ironically, killing literally everyone, which would completely lock you out of the raider narrative, which I wouldn't call a good way to compensate for the main game. To end this video, I'm going to talk about the one gripe I'm sure everyone's been waiting for, and that's the bugs. Even with the mod that's supposed to fix a lot of the problems, this game is filled with bugs. From bugs with characters, to bugs with quests, to annoying random crashes. And while I do find them incredibly annoying, I can at least forgive the fact they exist. With a game of this size and scope, with so many different systems interacting, bugs are an inevitability. And while I may not be happy with their existence, I can at least understand it and be thankful that they're not a constant occurrence.